Hello, hi, welcome back. I hope that you guys are all doing well. I hope that the week is treating you okay. And yeah, howdy, come on in, join this little bit of the internet where we talk about true crime for about 10 minutes of your day. The sun was super hot last week. So you know one of them ones where you feel like you got a tan and you're like, I'm not gonna wear makeup. And then you see yourself on camera and you're like, I should have worn makeup. But whatever, a little teeny tiny bit of housekeeping before we crack on today. Follow my true crime Instagram. It's pretty great because I post often on there. So you can hit the link in the description for the handle. And yeah, it's like an on this day of true crime. I try to keep it as up to date as breakfast radio will allow. And of course, subscribe to this here channel. So if you enjoy my content, make sure you leave a comment as well, be liking the videos, and most importantly, subscribe to stay up to date. Now, let's get down to the case that has brought us here today. I've got 10 minutes on the clock and I'm going to tell you a true crime story. This week we are traveling back to 1988 to North Carolina, Washington, and a case which is commonly referred to as the Dungeons and Dragons murder. Now, it was the early hours of July 25th that police who were responding to an emergency call found a married couple, Leith and Bonnie Von Stein, stabbed and brutally beaten in their home. Leith was pronounced dead, but Bonnie, somehow clinging to life, survived the attack. Her 18-year-old daughter Angela was found in the next room. She was unharmed, and detectives were immediately perplexed at the seemingly staged crime scene and potential suspects being extremely close to home. The investigation began, and without further ado, I'm Yinka Bokinni and this is the anniversary. The case and the subsequent trial that I'm talking about that turns 33 this year is the subject of not just 2 books but 2 films as well, one being a mini-series made for telly starring Gwyneth Paltrow. It became and still is a cult story in America, but one with a very real origin that has very real victims at the heart of it. The police were called by Bonnie Von Stein. So after being attacked in the most brutal way in her bed at home where she's supposed to be safe at night, after she suffered a knife wound in the chest, a loss of loads of blood, a collapsed lung, a fractured thumb and various bruises and lacerations, Bonnie managed to alert the authorities, but it was too late to save her husband. Leith Von Stein was 42 at the time of his murder. He was an executive at a textile factory and he was the second husband of Bonnie. There isn't heaps about him online, like I couldn't find anything about him having his own kids, so I can only assume that he didn't. Bonnie brought the 2 that she had from her previous relationship. Angela, 17, like I said before, lived in the house with them, and her bedroom was just down the hall from where the couple slept and where this attack took place. And Chris, who was 19 at the time, and he was a student at North Carolina University, where he lived in the dorms. Detectives who were assigned to the case initially had very little to go on. The attack seemed to be a personal one, but you could tell that from the brutal nature of it. The couple were not only beaten, but they were stabbed as well, and it seemed like an act of rage. But there weren't any enemies to speak of. When the detectives were looking at the house initially and at the crime scene, it was insanely staged. It looked like a robbery at first, but there was nothing missing. And apart from that, they kind of got nilch nada zero. I mean, I read in a few places, and Bonnie has been quite open about her criticism of this investigation and how it was handled, that the police just didn't treat the crime scene well at all. They didn't collect all of the evidence, they actually ignored loads of things, and Bonnie, who, like I said at the start, she survived the attack, didn't feel as though the investigation was taken seriously, at least initially. The police spoke to neighbours and potential witnesses anyway in the surrounding area, and a hog farmer came forward and said that on the night of the murder he saw a fire in the woods at around the time of the killing, and then when detectives went to go check it out, they did find a hunting knife, clothing and a scrap of paper that had a map of the Von Stein's neighbourhood in the remnants, in the ashes, in the debris that was left over. And digging a little bit deeper, they also found that Leith had a not so great relationship with his stepchildren. He was Bonnie's second husband, and Angela and Chris were from a previous relationship, and they did not get along with their stepdad. The case remained pretty cold for about 6 months. And there were just questions that any investigation should really be answering. The surviving family were under incredible scrutiny. Why had Bonnie not been killed? How had Bonnie not been killed in what was a frantic attack? Was she in league with the killers? What did Bonnie stand to gain? Now, Angela, who was behind a door in another room sleeping under the sound of just an electric fan, claimed to not have been awakened by the mayhem that was happening down the hall. But she seemed sullen at best when she was interviewed. She was unresponsive when it came to the death of her stepfather. And Chris was kind of like a failure. That's the way he was deemed by investigators anyway. He had been smoking a lot of marijuana, taking LSD, getting drunk, and fanatically playing the game Dungeons and Dragons. I had to have a little Google, because I'm a Sims girl, about what Dungeons and Dragons actually is. And it's a fantasy tabletop role-playing game, and basically you and your friends tell a story together and you guide your heroes through quests for treasure and battles and deadly foes. If you've watched Stranger Things, you kind of have a little bit of an idea as to what it's about. Chris seemingly was obsessed with the game. And another question that was on everybody's lips was, what about Leith von Stein's inheritance? Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen and non-binary, the plot thickens. Leith had money. He had inherited over $1 million shortly before he was killed, and with his insurance policy, he was worth about $2 million. Now, Chris was not happy about his stepfather's seeming stinginess. He often vented his frustrations to his fellow Dungeons and Dragons players at the North Carolina University that he was at. He basically said that his stepdad didn't spend any of the dough on him. And when pressured by police, some of Chris's friends revealed a little bit too much. The names James Upchurch and Neil Henderson were floating around. They were other D&D players on campus, and they may have been involved in some sort of plot with our mate Chris. Now, over the course of this sort of like long-winded investigation, Bonnie and Angela, so mother and daughter, both took and passed polygraph tests. They're not admissible in court. I'm not sure how I feel about them, but Chris was offered one, he refused to take it, and it turns out that he wasn't doing too well at uni either. He was flunking out, and his future, at least to him, wasn't looking so bright. And there was a breakthrough in the case that finally came in 1989. Chris's college friend, Neil Henderson, one of our people of interest from before, confessed to investigators that he had driven another friend, James Upchurch, ding ding ding, no prizes for guessing, to and from the scene of the murder at the instigation of Chris. So Chris promised to use his projected inheritance money, this money that actually didn't belong to him and was Leith's, to reward them if his mum and stepfather were both killed. Because if his mum and stepfather were both out of the picture, Chris would inherit this $2 million. And that was the plot. That was the story, and that was the quest that the Dungeons and Dragons players were on. At the trial, because yes, it did come to a trial, it was revealed that Chris had drawn a map so that the killers could find his parents' home. Now, he told them that they better hurry because he had a term paper due the next day, and unless his parents were murdered that night, he wouldn't have a good reason for not turning it in on time. And initially, I wasn't even sure why I kept that in this write-up. I wasn't sure if I was going to include that little quote in this video, but I do think that it shows kind of the level of game playing that was at stake and the role in which Chris thought that he was playing, because it really was 1 + 1 = 2, and this plus this equals this, and then we get to the next level of whatever story is unfolding. Now, the trial took place in January 1990, and Chris Pritchard, who after his arrest admitted to masterminding the murder conspiracy, and Neil Henderson, our little mate singing from before, became star witnesses for the prosecution, and they turned on James Upchurch. Neil said that he was the driver and the lookout, and they pinned everything on James. They said that he broke into the house, that he committed the attacks, and that he was ultimately responsible for what happened to Leith. James denied all charges, but was found guilty of first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, conspiracy to commit murder, and burglary in the first degree, and he was sentenced to death, but that was commuted to life in prison, and he's actually up for parole in 2022, so next year. Chris was convicted after confessing of aiding and abetting in a second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison but was released in June of 2007. He became a born-again Christian, and I accidentally found his Twitter and spent a lot of time scrolling through it while I was researching this case, and it just exists on there like that. And Neil Henderson was released from prison in the year 2000. And even after the 3 conspirators were sentenced, even after this trial died down and Bonnie gave her story away to be written into books and into movies, most people involved with the prosecution, most people on Reddit and on all the websites that I use to get all the information for this case agree that there is so much that was never clarified during the trials. So there you have it, the Dungeons and Dragons murders. I think a case that we're able to piece together and kind of stitch it so you can see the narrative and essentially gather what happened. But after all of my research, and I watched one of the movies, the Gwyneth Paltrow one, she's like 19, it's a bit odd to watch her in it. I am left with one question that I want to know what you think. Do we think that Angela was innocent? She was 17 at the time of these crimes, and she was never charged. She was never officially listed as a suspect in this case. But do we think that she knew absolutely nothing about what was happening in her own home to her mum and to her stepdad? Now, Bonnie maintained that she believed that Chris was innocent right up until he was found guilty at trial, and she visited him throughout the time he was in prison. She said that he is a reformed character. I didn't see that she had forgiven him, but I saw that they very much have a relationship. But let me know what you think anyway in this case that is very much a layered family just kerfuffle of emotion and violence. Drop a comment and also leave any suggestions for any cases that you would like me to cover on this little slice of the internet. I'll be back next week with a brand new crime. Subscribe, of course. Have a good week, and I'll see you later.